Mr. President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me, first of all, just thank Senator Whitehouse for heading up this campaign finance task force. I think this has been a real solid effort by a number of senators, and Senator Whitehouse, whether it's at Netroots or here on the Senate floor, has been participating this evening, and we really appreciate all of his help. The presiding officer, Senator Merkley, has also been a key member of the task force. Senator Bennett, who is going to be speaking after me, another member of the task force, and we so appreciate all of us getting together. And one of the things we need to be reminded of this evening is where we are. We just took a vote to try to get on to the DISCLOSE Act bill. And 51 Democrats said, let's get on to the bill, and 44 Republicans. Not a single Republican voted to allow us to get on the bill. And basically what we're in the Senate, as Senator Bennett and Senator Whitehouse and Senator Merkley know, we're in the mode of a full filibuster now. We're on a motion to proceed. We're not allowed to get onto the bill. And so people should just recognize that's the posture we're in right now, and yet we're going to be down here. We're going to be talking about this issue. And I joined my colleagues today to talk about this serious problem of campaign finance reform, one that threatens the very nature of our democracy. And that threat is the unprecedented flow of money into our elections. We need to look at this dangerous torrent of money and consider how to stop it. And I believe a step in the right direction is the DISCLOSE Act. In January 2010, the Supreme Court issued its disastrous opinion in Citizens United versus FEC. 2 months later, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decided Speech Now versus FEC, which the Supreme Court upheld. These two cases gave rise to super PACs. They opened the floodgates of secret cash. Super PACs have poured millions of dollars into negative and misleading campaign ads, and they often do so under the cover of darkness. Quiet, stealthy, without disclosing the true source of the donations. It's ironic. They make all this sound and fury on the airways, but they are silent on who is paying for it. Why? Why the silence? Why the cat and mouse? The American people are blessed with common sense. They know that usually when someone will not admit to something, it's because there is something to hide. And they have seen where all that shadowy campaign money can take us, to corruption, to scandal, to places like Watergate, dark days where we have been before. And believe me, I don't think the American people want to go back to the era when we had big suitcases of cash and the president was keeping in his White House safe cash. The American people don't want to return there. The Citizens United and Speech Now decision sparked a renewed focus on the need for campaign finance reform. But let's be clear, the court laid the groundwork for this broken system many years ago. In 1976, the court held in Buckley versus Vallejo that restricting independent campaign expenditures violates the First Amendment right to free speech. That ruling established the flawed precedent that money and speech are the same thing. Another nail in the coffin of common sense. And the result? Elections based too much on the ability to raise money and too little on the quality of ideas. Too much on a dedication to fundraising and too little on the public good. Money and free speech are not the same thing. And it is a tortured logic to say they are. They may seem comparable in the rarefied hallways of the Supreme Court, but not in the rough and tumble streets of political campaigns. We know this, and the super PACs writing these huge checks know it too. And they must be chuckling all the way to the bank. But the American people do not find this funny, infuriating perhaps, but definitely not funny. I don't think we can truly fix this broken system until we undo the false premise. The premise that spending money on elections is the same thing as the constitutional right of free speech. That can only be achieved if the court overturns Buckley or we amend the Constitution. Until then, we will fall short of the real reform that is needed. But we still should do all we can in the meantime to make a bad situation better. And that's what we've been trying to do with the DISCLOSE Act. That's what we must do with the DISCLOSE Act. It's not the comprehensive reform that I would like to see, but the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. And the DISCLOSE Act is the good that we can do now. It's a step forward, a vital step forward, even with this flawed Supreme Court precedents that constrain us. The DISCLOSE Act is a step out of the shadows, and that is exactly where we need to be headed. The DISCLOSE Act of 2012 asks a simple question, an important and eminently fair question. Where does the money come from and where is it going? And let me just say, if we don't start asking that question, we may soon be asking another one that we heard when scandals shook this country in years past. What did he know and when did he know it? So a simple question that follows the money, that says the American people have a right to know who is writing the checks. Under the bill, any covered organization, including corporations, labor unions, nonprofit organizations, and super PACs, that spend $10,000 or more on campaign-related disbursements during an election cycle would have to file a report with the Federal Election Commission that discloses all donations above $10,000. It also requires the disclosure of any transfer made to a third party for the purposes of campaign-related expenditures. This addresses the growing problem of using so-called social welfare organizations to funnel anonymous money to super PACs. This is a practical, sensible measure. It doesn't get money out of our elections, but it does shine a light into the dark corners of the campaign finance system. A similar bill in the last Congress had broad support, broad bipartisan support, with 59 votes in the Senate and passing the House. But since then, we have all watched the flood of money raining down during this election year. We are seeing the real impact of Citizens United and Speech Now decisions on our elections. The need for this legislation has become even more apparent. I serve on the Senate Rules Committee, and in March, Chairman Schumer held a hearing on the DISCLOSE Act, and we heard several concerns about the bill, both from our Republican colleagues on the committee and their witness. At the hearing, the minority witness claimed that there were many provisions in the bill that he disliked. And he said, "I think perhaps the most radical is the government-mandated disclaimer." While I disagree with his assertion that standing by your ad is a radical idea, that's no longer an issue in this bill. We've taken it out, the disclaimer provision. I still believe it's an important provision, but we listened to the minority's concerns and revised the bill. Another concern raised at the hearing was the effective date of the legislation. Senator Alexander is our ranking member on the committee, and I think a great deal of him and appreciate the work that he and Chairman Schumer have done on many issues. At the hearing on DISCLOSE, Senator Alexander said the following: "This hearing is as predictable as the spring flowers in the middle of an election. My friends on the other side of the aisle are trying to change the campaign finance laws to discourage contributions from people with whom they disagree, all to take effect on July 1, 2012. Well, guess what, Senator Alexander? We've also addressed this concern. the bill has been changed so that the disclosure requirements go into effect at the beginning of next year. So the shadow groups can still do everything in their power to buy this election. They can still hide their faces from the voters, but they would have to step up to the plate the next time around. They could still write the checks, they could still try to buy future elections, but they would finally have to say who they are at the checkout stand. The bill we are considering is as simple and straightforward as it gets. If you're making large donations to influence an election, the voters in that election should know who you are. And that is not a radical concept. What's really disappointing is that this type of disclosure and campaign finance reform more generally used to have broad bipartisan support. Now that conservative super PACs are raising huge sums of cash and hiding many of their donors, disclosure has suddenly become another partisan issue. If you look at past reform efforts, they have always been bipartisan. In 1972, the Federal Election Campaign Act passed with strong bipartisan support from both parties. After Watergate, Democrats and Republicans came together again to strengthen the act and set limits on independent expenditures. More recently, in 2002, we passed the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as McCain-Feingold. That bill passed in the Senate with broad support. 5 of our current Republican colleagues voted for it. And the constitutional amendment that Senator Bennett and I introduced this Congress, that also used to be bipartisan. Senator Fritz Hollings was the lead sponsor for many years, but the amendment was always bipartisan. It had the support of respected Republican senators like Ted Stevens, Arlen Specter.
The senator has utilized 10 minutes.
John Danforth, Thad Cochran, and John McCain. I would ask the chair for an additional 2 minutes.
Without objection.
So you can see why I'm disappointed with the partisanship that has taken over this important issue. It's not like the problem of money influencing our elections has been solved. The recent Supreme Court decision struck down laws that my Republican colleagues voted for. I hope that they would be willing to work with us now to pass disclosure laws that will withstand judicial scrutiny. And Mr. President, I would ask that my full statement be put in the record as if spoken.
Without objection.
And with that, I would yield the floor.